Brains. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning. It is just after 9:30 on this Thursday morning. You're watching The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Tom taking a well-earned rest. Coming up over the next 30 minutes, we're going to hold all the latest news, debate and analysis from Westminster and beyond on TV, online and on your radio too. But before all of that, here's the very latest news.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Ukrainian forces are preparing for new Russian attacks, with British intelligence suggesting heavy fighting's likely to take place in the suburbs of Kyiv in the coming days. This morning, President Volodymyr Zelensky was given a standing ovation as he addressed the Australian Parliament.
We know that our dream is undefeatable and undestructed, especially if we can count on the support of the free world, on your support, on your assistance. And like in the history that I just told, we needed not just in a couple of months, but we needed urgently now.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced more funds and aid for Ukraine and labelled Russia's Vladimir Putin a war criminal before handing the floor to President Zelensky. He warned Russia poses a nuclear threat to the world and said stronger sanctions are still needed. The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, will urge India to join allies in opposing Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Liz Truss is in New Delhi for talks with her counterpart. It follows concerns the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is reluctant to publicly condemn Moscow's actions. In other news, households are expected to be more than £2,500 worse off due to the cost of living squeeze. New analysis from Labour combined tax hikes, food, energy and fuel prices, as well as mortgage costs. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good morning and welcome to the programme here on GB News. We're going to have lots over the next 30 minutes for you. And as always, do get in touch with us, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or indeed you can tweet us at GB News, and we'll get to some of your views, whether it is on Partygate, the cost of living crisis, Ukraine, whatever else is irking you this morning. We'll get to that a little later on in the programme. But first, Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer from Labour are saying that Boris Johnson must resign as Prime Minister over widespread criminality in Downing Street during the lockdown. So Keir Starmer made the comments after the Metropolitan Police said that the first 20 fines for COVID-breaking rules parties had been issued. The Labour leader accused Mr Johnson of misleading MPs by previously saying no rules had been broken. The Prime Minister brushed past the comments yesterday and said the police must be allowed to get on with their investigations. It comes, though, this morning as the International Trade Secretary again repeated what the Deputy Prime Minister had said yesterday, but Downing Street has so far refused to say, is that the law was clearly broken in and around Downing Street. Well, joining me now is John McTernan. He's the political strategist, former political secretary to Tony Blair. Good morning, John, as always. Just on this point, it might seem a bit moot in some regards, but why is Downing Street essentially refusing to state what seems obvious, even to many cabinet ministers, that the law was broken?
I think it's because it's the next question they don't want to answer. So once you concede a crime was committed, when there must be a crime, the rules must have been broken, otherwise there'd be no fines. But once you concede that, then the question becomes, what did the Prime Minister know? When did he know it? Will he correct the record in the House of Commons? Because he is insistent in the House of Commons that nothing had happened. The Metropolitan Police have concluded something happened. They've issued the fines. So the thing is, will he now correct the record? He doesn't want to go down that line. Downing Street don't want to go down that line because a Prime Minister who misleads Parliament, a minister who misleads Parliament, is normally meant under convention to resign, and they just don't want that question to arise. So they'd rather differ from other members of the Cabinet than actually answer the direct question.
Just in regards to all of this, though, John, there are many people, many of our viewers who say, frankly, we're all bored of this, we should move on, get a sense of perspective given what's happening in Ukraine, given the cost of living crisis. What's your sense of the public mood on all of this? Do you think most people have simply moved on, or do you think there is still a moment of peril for the Prime Minister?
I think the public have made their mind up. So whether they're bored with this discussion or not, the thing is, they've decided. Look at that poll just before the war started. Only 32% of people support the PM. 68% of people think he's a liar, think he's a hypocrite, think he should resign. Now, he didn't resign, but they've made up their minds. 32% is the core Tory vote. It means every swing voter in the whole of the country has decided that he was in the wrong. And he may want to move on from it. It simply leaves the public waiting to be able to cast an electoral verdict. So I think the damage is done in that sense. Downing Street are right. The damage is done. Nothing can be changed for the PM by resigning, by the PM by accepting anything. He's going to push through this. The question is, how damaging is it for the party? And I suspect there's lots of MPs who are denying reality by going, look, we can get through this. If we give us another day, get through it. But everything that happens for the government domestically gives them problems, like the national insurance rise, like not giving more help to the poorest, like the impact of the increased energy bills that are going to be coming through to people in the coming weeks.
John, let's move on away from Partygate to Labour, if we can, for a second. Yep. Rachel Reeves, I was listening to her on the radio this morning, was asked again about, how would you describe a man or a woman? These big questions around trans issues. Keir Starmer kind of batted it away last week. Wes Streeting tried to answer it yesterday on Talk Radio. I mean, clearly the media across the board are asking these questions of Labour frontline politicians. They don't seem to have a clear, coherent answer, something that Tony Blair has said Labour need to sort out, or they're going to trip themselves over and over again on this issue. Do you agree with that, or do you think it should just be up to essentially individual Labour MPs to decide on this, given the sensitivity of the issue?
I think the thing is, Keir is right. Nothing is done to help trans women by asking or answering a question about do trans women have penises. Trans women are women and they have rights. Women have rights. And the attack, the prurient, strange set of questioning on this issue isn't about easing the situation of anybody who faced suppression or violence. Women face extraordinary levels of violence in our society. We know that, and we know how badly the Metropolitan Police are failing and other police forces. Trans women face extraordinary discrimination and violence too. The issue is, if you care about rights for women, rights for trans women, this question is utterly irrelevant. It's only designed by people who want to set people in our society at each other's throats. We've had too much division in the UK. I think Keir's answer was right. I think this issue has to go away. I think, for once, I disagree with Tony. It's a rare moment. I don't think he's right on the issue of trans rights. I think trans rights are human rights, and the resistance to trans rights comes from, well, it comes from the Conservative Party in a sense. It comes from the top. And we saw the human situation. The Prime Minister tries to make a joke at Labour's expense around trans rights, and one of his MPs comes out as the first trans MP to come out. That's the human reality, and there are families up and down the country for whom this is real, and I don't think anything is served, any justice is served, any rights are served, any rights are protected by this question being put again and again and again.
OK, and I should just point out, you know, it's a whole range of media organisations. I think Keir was asked on LBC, Rachel on the BBC this morning, and Wes on Talk Radio. But we'll come back to that another day. Just before we let you go, John, I want to talk to you about abortion, because MPs voted yesterday to allow women in England to continue accessing abortion pills at home. It was due to stop, but MPs voted to keep the change.
I think that was a great victory for women and women's rights. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to see the Commons do. We know the Commons stood up for women and abortion rights in Northern Ireland. They're having to force the Northern Ireland government, the civil servants, to actually implement the UK legislation. I think we've heard what happened during the pandemic. Women's access to the abortion pill actually stone dead stopped backstreet abortions, illegal abortions. That is right. No woman should have to risk her life in that way, and it's the right thing. And I think it's another sign that women have huge power to get what they want through the House of Commons. And I think, you know, the next Metropolitan Commissioner needs to be chosen with that in mind, that women's rights are at the top of the agenda. In a sense, that's what the last question we're talking about is about. It's about women's voices are now so powerful in politics. They can't be ignored. That's going to change things in the decades to come. And this is one of the very first good changes to see.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed for joining us. John McTernan there, joining us down the line. We apologise for the slightly fuzzy connection, but we heard you loud and clear. Let's move on now to Ukraine, because after indicating it would scale back operations to foster trust between the two sides, Russian forces have reportedly escalated their bombardment in Ukraine yesterday. This is President Zelensky said that Russian forces are preparing new advances in the east of the country. Meanwhile, last night we heard from the head of GCHQ, that's Jeremy Fleming. He was speaking in Australia about the invasion. And here's what he had to say about what the intelligence is telling us.
We've seen Russian soldiers, short of weapons and morale, refusing to carry out orders, sabotaging their own equipment, and even accidentally shooting down their own aircraft. And even though we believe Putin's advisors are afraid to tell him the truth, what's going on and the extent of these misjudgments must be crystal clear to the regime.
OK, well, let's bring in the journalist, Stefan Weikert, who is a Danish journalist, but just travelled back from Ukraine recently. Stefan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, you've just come back from Ukraine. What's your assessment of the morale among Ukrainians, and particularly those that are fighting on the front line?
Well, the people that I'm speaking to in Ukraine also now, when I'm in Denmark here temporarily, is people who are saying that you know, they are kind of stunned and surprised by the lack of efficiency, you can say, in the Russian military, as we also just heard before. You know, it's people who have a very high morale and who are thinking that they're winning. That's also what we are seeing from also like opinion polls in Ukraine, is that there's a strong belief among Ukrainians, that being civilians and that being military, that they are able to defend their country, and that in the end, they're going to win this war.
And Stefan, we've heard, haven't we, from the Russians saying that they're going to change strategy to a degree, focus much more on the east, that they are pulling back from Kyiv. But there's much scepticism amongst Western allies and indeed the Ukrainian administration that is what's going to happen.
Yeah, we really don't know. There is some reports that the Russian military is starting to pull out some troops, but not, talked about like maybe 20% of the troops around Kyiv to reposition them to the eastern front line. But it's really early and we cannot say anything for sure. And we have to note that that doesn't mean that the fighting around the capital Kyiv have diminished. I mean, we have seen a lot of fighting going on in recent days. And the people I'm talking to in Kyiv are also saying that right now we're actually seeing an increased number of like explosions that can be heard in the outskirts of Kyiv. So fighting is definitely continuing to go on, and whether Russia actually will change their focus, I think is maybe too early to say.
Well, it's fascinating as well, isn't it, that we hear that maybe some troops are regrouping in Belarus, that people from the Wagner group, this kind of group of mercenaries, if you like, are being sent to the east along with some other conscripts. it does sound like, despite the public messaging from Russia, that they may well be trying to up the ante in many regards while suggesting publicly that they are de-escalating.
Yeah, for sure. We also, I mean, the Wagner group is one thing, but we also heard, Russia trying to mobilize Syrian fighters. We have seen them pull out some of their troops in South Ossetia, in Georgia, and other parts of Russia as well. So it seems like there is a big mobilizing of foreign troops to fight on the Russian side, and also more Russian troops from within Russia to go to the front line as well. Yeah.
Very finally, Stefan, we've got you, quite extraordinary speech last night from the head of one of our intelligence services, suggesting that Vladimir Putin was not being told the truth by his own military chiefs in regards to the losses that are happening in Ukraine and how difficult it's proving to be. Is that something that you've heard there in Denmark? Is there a suggestion that Vladimir Putin hasn't got a proper understanding of just how badly this seems to be going in Ukraine?
Yeah, our security forces have not said something similar, but of course it's also in Denmark a big discussion. That this obviously big military losses that we are seeing from the Russian army is a big surprise also here in Denmark. I mean, like all other Western countries, we did expect that it will be very difficult for Ukraine to protect itself against Russia. So I think we are also speculating here in Denmark, also like just in our families, etc., what is really going on and to what does Putin really know. And then, of course, there is a fear here in Denmark, as there is in Ukraine among civilians, is to say that if the war is going to go so badly for Putin, what then? Is he going to keep escalating? Is he going to start using weapons that he haven't done so far? And I think that's also what we here in Denmark are discussing, that kind of thin line to supporting Ukraine. At the same time, the fear that because the war is going badly, and maybe when Putin will realize this, if he doesn't already, what would he do then? Will he step up or will he step down? Like pull back his forces.
Okay, Stefan, appreciate your analysis there. Join us live from Denmark. Safe travels back to Ukraine when you do. Thank you very much indeed for joining us with your analysis this morning. Let's move back home now, because the spring statement last week, the Chancellor pledged to build a stronger and more secure economy. But as we approach April, and it is tomorrow, national insurance is set to rise by 1.25%, which actually in reality is about a 10% increase, helping the economy recover after the pandemic. But it means, of course, paying extra on your monthly wage, hundreds of pounds for the average taxpayer. Does it come at the worst possible time as the cost of living increases and our energy bills soar? But from July, the point at which people do stop paying that national insurance tax will increase to £12,570. But could the government be doing more? Well, join me now to discuss all of this is Joe Ventry. He's the Digital Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. A very good morning to you, Joe. I suppose this comes down to a big debate within the Treasury. Something the Chancellor would suggest is that we have to increase taxes because we're increasing spending and we're having to pay down a debt. The worst thing we could do right now is borrow more money.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Darren. Yeah, you're absolutely right about this debate in the Treasury. The line that we keep hearing from the Treasury is basically that we've got this binary choice. It's either that we raise taxes or we borrow money. But of course, we know that simply isn't the case. The reality is that billions upon billions of pounds of taxpayers' money is wasted every year. And I think a much fairer and more logical approach would be to tackle that waste and ensure that those funds are directed to frontline services like our healthcare service. I mean, if anything, this crisis really should have been a catalyst for the government to seek out those sorts of savings. And, in fairness, we are hearing good things now from the Cabinet Office with their new efficiency drive, and they aim to, deliver £5.5 billion worth of savings. But I think this really does need to go a lot further. I mean, the reality is that households across the country are now having to make savings to make ends meet. And I think it's only right that the government adopts the same approach before tapping up taxpayers yet again.
But in saying that, you talk about savings, but in reality, I mean, there's only so much fat you can trim before you start hitting the bone, i.e. savings are another way of saying cuts. And isn't that the point, is the public in some ways wants to have its cake and eat it, in that it doesn't want taxes to go up, but it does want increased public spending, particularly in the area of health?
Well, it's quite logical that you would want more more spending on frontline healthcare services, but I would say that there is definitely fat left to trim, and people are well aware of this. I mean, you may have seen recently the NHS employing people on huge salaries for diversity and inclusion roles. I'd say most taxpayers would see that as very tangential to their needs from the healthcare service. But I think there are other avenues to look at as well. I mean, embracing innovation and sort of ramping up those sorts of efficiencies would certainly be one avenue to look at. I mean, there's this supposed 12 billion a year hole that the government is looking to fill in the health and social care funding. And so I think the question that we can ask there is, how can we meet that figure without tax rises? And I mean, when TPA Research looked at this a couple of years ago, what we found there was that more automation in the healthcare service and in the social care sector, you could save up to £18.5 billion a year. And I think that's really the sort of radical thinking that we need to be considering in terms of how we leave taxpayers with more money in their pockets whilst delivering on those essential services.
The only thing I would say to that, Joe, is that, that is something, at the very least, that is probably going to take years, certainly months and months to try and sort out. It's not going to be done quickly, but people would argue they need help now, and they need more help now. And that means in the short term, don't you think in the end the government politically is just going to have to do more?
They definitely need to do more, and that's certainly the case. But, as you mentioned there, Darren, we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. I think, as you mentioned at the start there, on the face of it, this is a 1.25% increase, but that figure does really mask how significant of an increase this is. I mean, if you take a person earning £20,000 a year, they're going to see their national insurance payments increase by £130. That's no small amount of money for a lot of people in this country. And I think that would be bad enough in and of itself. But when you think of everything else that taxpayers are contending with this year, like surging energy prices, rising inflation, upcoming council tax rises, it really is no understatement to call this a cost of living crisis.
OK, Joe Ventry, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, let's end on energy, because Boris Johnson has hinted at a potential energy plan. Hinted time and time again. It's been delayed, though, time and time again. Promised a couple of weeks ago, promised this week, probably might come next month. Plans were delayed, of course, by the fallout within the Cabinet over a row between nuclear power funding and onshore wind farms. The Prime Minister stated that he believes offshore wind has potential and stressed the need for new nuclear developments, though nuclear development, of course, takes many, many years. Well, joining me now is Richard Ollington. He is the project manager of Radiant Energy Group. Very good afternoon. Good morning to you, Richard. Just first of all, on where we think the government's at in all of this, the Prime Minister does seem opposed to onshore winds, doesn't he? And that's quite difficult because that would really help us out.
Yes, onshore wind would help us out on windy days. But of course, we need to think of the bigger picture. There's days with wind, and there's days when the weather doesn't play ball. And for those days, we need gas as a backup, or ideally, a green form of energy that can be powering the UK, whether the weather is good or bad.
And is that nuclear energy? Because there is much talk about these kind of small small nuclear reactors, aren't there, that Rolls-Royce is looking at. But even if that was the case, and it sounds quite clever and quite good, we're not going to see that on stream for at least another decade.
Yeah, so there's multiple different sources of reliable green electricity. There's hydropower, geothermal, and nuclear. But in the UK, the main one that's scalable is nuclear energy. And yes, it looks like small modular reactors, the types built by Rolls-Royce, look like construction might only start in 10 years. But there are other reactors where construction can start a lot earlier. So General Electric Hitachi have a reactor that's ready to go, ready to start construction soon as sort of the papers are signed, effectively. And there's many other small modular reactors out there that can be built early. There's also large modular reactors, such as what we've got built in Hinkley Point C, and that's been built in Sizewell C in the future, hopefully. And at the moment, those do take 10 years to build, but there's large scope for that time to come down. So in China, they've built those reactors, and they take less than 5 years to build.
Though, of course, China's slightly better than us, it must be said, when it comes to infrastructure, considering we're still debating about Heathrow and its third runway in our fourth decade. Just before we let you go, though, what do you think the solution to this is in the short term? I know you talked about kind of green energy, but many are saying, actually, in the immediate term, we should be looking at fracking, or indeed, at the very least, our gas and oil reserves in the North Sea. Is that where the government strategy should initially begin?
So getting more gas is one option, politically sensitive. I'd like to look at France for another short-term option. So in France, electricity prices are set to rise 4% this year. And that's much lower than in the rest of Europe, or in the UK, where I think they're set to rise at 50%. And the reason France can raise its electricity prices by only 4% is that it's got a nationalised provider of power, and they ensure that electricity is paid for based off the cost of producing electricity, as opposed to in the UK, where it's based off the marginal cost of producing electricity. So a simple change in the way that electricity is paid for can vastly reduce short-term cost. And I'd recommend looking up Professor Dieter Helm's report on this. He published a report back in, I think it was 2015 for the government. Sadly, it's been 7 years now. And
well, maybe you should get on the phone to number 10 with your suggestions, or maybe they're listening this morning and watching. Thank you very much indeed, Richard Ollington there, joining us from the Radiant Energy Group. Thank you, Richard. OK, that's it from me for today. We will be back at 12 with Gloria, 3 with me this afternoon with your latest politics. Up next, though, it's To The Point with Patrick and Mercy. It's after the weather, and it's bloody cold.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. It might be the first day of April tomorrow, but today starts off freezing cold with a mixture of frost, ice, and in some places lying snow. Cold winds have arrived all the way from the Arctic, and they'll continue to blow through the rest of the day. Now, those cold winds have brought snow to places. Watch out for some icy patches first thing, and there'll be further wintry showers during the rest of the day, especially in the east and the north, so a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow. Away from the showers, however, there will be some sunny spells. It's a bright enough day, but it's going to feel much colder than it has felt for some time, with a biting northeasterly wind, particularly around the southeast coast, and temperatures struggling to get to 5, 6, 7 Celsius in the east, 8 or 9 in the west. Knock a few degrees off for the wind chill, of course, and through the evening, clearing skies will lead to, once again, plummeting temperatures. Now, if you're lucky enough to live in the north, there's a good chance of seeing the aurora this evening, so look out for that. But away from the clear skies in the north, there'll be further showers coming into the east at times. Again, a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow. So some ice perhaps in places, and a widespread frost to start off tomorrow morning. Plenty of sunshine, mind you, as we start off the day. And despite the cold start, it's going to be, for many, less windy. It's also going to be bright and dry for many. There'll be a few more showers coming into central and eastern parts of the country. Mixture of rain and sleet, I think, and some rain or sleet showers into the west of Scotland and Northern Ireland. But away from these areas, for many, it's a dry and bright day. Temperatures reaching 7 to 9 Celsius, so recovering very slightly compared to today. And that very slow recovery in temperatures continues through the weekend. Showers for many on Saturday, dry for many away from the far north on Sunday, highs of 10 degrees.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a